If you ever felt lost and tried to buy a house, welcome to Mortgage Support. Today, I'm answering real questions people send me every day. And by the way, I'm Nathan. I've helped over 500 families, and mortgage is all I do all day long, so I've seen it all. Let's start with question number one. Hi, Nathan. My parents plan on gifting me around $30,000. I was thinking about paying off my student loans to help with my debt. Do you think I should do that? So that's a really good question, and actually a very common question. So let's go over how to think about this. And I want to teach frameworks here, because if I teach a framework, if you give a man a fish that eats for a day, if you teach a man fish, then he'll fish for a lifetime or won't ever be hungry, something like that, right? So let's go over paying off student loans or even paying off debt if you have a large sum of money that's getting it as a gift. I first want to talk about the 5 monthly costs, and the 5th one most people don't know about. And I'm going to assume this is like if it's in an HOA, it would technically be 6, but we're going to say it's a single family. So 5 factors in your payment, PMT. Okay, so a lot of people know about principal. Promise this will make sense in a second. Interest, if I spelled that right. Taxes or property taxes. 4 is insurance. So most people know this. And insurance includes PMI if you're putting under 10%. So this is the common saying is you're gonna hear all these fancy people say, pity, what's my pity? P-I-T-I, right? So that's gonna be the 4 main factors that most people know about. The 5th one is maintenance. Oh shoot, how do I spell maintenance? Maintenance. I know the 5 factors, but I don't know how to spell it. So let's just pretend that that is maintenance. So a lot of home buyers don't know about maintenance, okay? What I always recommend is, hey, let's shoot for 1% of the home price. So let's say it's $100,000. You wanna do 1% of that. So that's $1,000 per year. So then you divide that by 12. That's like my rough rule of thumb of what you wanna allocate and, save away and stash away just in case there's emergencies that pop up. The question is, I guess, when the emergencies pop up, right? So what I'm trying to say is, if we do the student loans and pay it off right away, so let's say we have, we have happy face, $30,000 of SL, student loans, right? And then we're like, okay, cool. I'm gonna get the $30,000 gift, G for gift. We're gonna take this, eliminate the student loans, then the student loans are paid off, right? So the issue here is, once you actually move in and you didn't know about this maintenance that I spelled completely wrong and this 1% rough rule of thumb, then technically you can't go backwards and be like, okay, well, I want to cash out all my student loans, go back to the payment, and then start paying for this, right? Additionally, on top of it, when you actually buy a house, there's a lot of unknown variables, right? So there's basically going to be your inspection, your appraisal, and then your loan, which when you find the house, you're gonna have due diligence on these 3 items. So if you go into a house inspection and then you notice like, hey, this is the dream house, it checks off all the boxes, but there's something wrong with the roof. But because you were awesome and you worked with an amazing real estate agent, you were able to negotiate like $20,000 off the purchase price. So that saves you quite a bit of money on the acquisition cost. But when you get into contract, because the sellers were like, hey, we don't have enough money to lower the purchase price even more to fix the roof, then in this situation, if we spent all this money on the student loans and we don't have any maintenance reserves and we need the roof to be replaced, that's gonna put you in a really tight spot. So what I always recommend is, if you're getting a gift, try to hold off until you speak with a mortgage advisor and they let you know what's the smartest plan. So in this situation, for this client, not to disclose any like confidential information, my recommendation was, because of how much money they had in savings, that I would recommend that they hold this gift and keep it as a, bolster up their savings for now until we know the inspection, until we know the appraisal, and then until we know the loan. Inspection is basically, is the house falling apart? What's the appraisals? How much is the house worth? Loan is, am I actually gonna get the money for the loan? Until we figure out all these 3 main factors and we get 100% resolution on those, then we can figure out what to do with this money. Because right now, there's a lot of variables that you're not in control of. Until we know those, then I would say keep the money in for now, because that's gonna give you the most options available. Whereas if you paid off the student loans, then you figured out you needed the roof, then you already spent the money, if that makes sense. So that would be my recommendation. Long story short is, keep the money flexible. which is keep it in your high yield savings or savings account or keep it with the parents. And until you uncover all these data points, then you can make a decision with your mortgage advisor and real estate agent. So hope that helps. Question number 2, my partner and I are debating between 2 different homes at 500K to 550. The homes are all right, but there seems to be way better homes at 600 to 650. Not sure what we should do. Is there any way we can run some scenarios? All right, so obviously I redacted the personal information, but this is a common dilemma, which is you might be, let's say, looking at houses at 500 to 550, and that might be like a C to C plus neighborhood. But when you buy something at 600 or 650 or some other major purchase price jump, it might be 600, it might be 400 for your local area or something like that, right? Then you see just a higher quality of houses. So this is something I like to break up in when I'm trying to like better understand what is your main goal, right? Because if you're just trying to buy it and flip it within the next day, we have to be ultra specific on what we buy. It's almost like day trading. You have to be perfect with what you buy, when you sell it, etc. Or you hold it as a rental. You have a lot of room for error, I should say. So first, I always like to ask in this scenario, which is what's your risk tolerance? So risk tolerance, okay? So from a scale of 1, to 10, what's your risk tolerance? I'm personally like a 2.5, meaning I like to buy less risky things or make less risky bets, I should say. Even though I'm a business owner, which is kind of weird. I know it sounds weird, but let's just say I helped a lot of families before I figured out, oh, I think I can do this on my own. So it took me a lot of data to figure that out. 10 out of 10 is, hey, I'm gonna take all my money and put it on black when I go to Vegas. 1 is, I'm just gonna stick my money into a savings account or a high yield savings account, right? So 2.5 is kind of like in between, obviously 5. I would say 5 is, hey, I'm comfortable doing like the S&P 500. I'm comfortable investing a little bit of crypto. Like if you go in 7 to 8, you're gonna be like, I'm betting the house on crypto and Bitcoin going to 200,000 or 300,000, right? As we're recording this, it's around 100 and change. But yeah, that's kind of like how you would wanna figure that out. So first, we gotta figure out what's your risk tolerance first, because that'll give me an indication of what's gonna be best for us. Do we stick with the lower price point or higher price point, right? Then what you wanna figure out is your comfortable PMT. So that's your comfortable payment. And I always talk in ranges, right? Because it's not like a binary 3,000 a month or 4,000 a month and it's $4,001 and you're like, I'm super uncomfortable and it's unacceptable, there's no way. So it's usually a range. So I like to figure out what's your comfort range, right? It might be, let's say 3,500 a month to 4,500 a month in this hypothetical example, right? In your payment. So figuring that out, if you have trouble figuring out what your comfortable payment is, check out the link down below where I have what's called the homeownership free trial. I literally built a guide on how you can figure out your comfortable budget for free before you actually take on buying a house. So check that out, it's completely free. And I know it's helpful because everyone that's gone through the process with me and has used it has been like, wow, this is amazing. So I know it's gonna help you out there if you're watching this. So first figure this out and you can use my homeownership free trial guide to figure this out. But these clients already figured that out. So, okay, cool. Then we crunched some numbers and we're like, okay, one other thing that I forgot to mention was they did have a pretty sizable down payment. It was around the 50 to 100,000 range. Let's just say that. So we did want to figure out a few things of like, hey, do we use some of that money to put down on the house? So remember the last thing, we want to make sure we save a little bit of money for maintenance. And in their situation, my rule of thumb is like, okay, if you're self-employed, like 1099/1099, if that makes sense. Or if you are a business owner, self-employed and 1099 is basically like you're a self-employee, if that makes sense. You don't have much overhead, but business owner, like me, there's people on my team, so you have to be smart. You don't want to spend all your money. So I always recommend 12 months of expenses in the bank. So mortgages, etc., period. So that way you can be smart and you don't have to lay anybody off. Self-employed at 1099, I recommend 9 months. Salary, 6 months of mortgage payments and expenses. So usually for salary, if you don't have crazy expenses, usually just gonna be your mortgage or living expenses. So in their situation, there was salary. So we wanted to allocate minimum 6 months of reserves, just purely there. I think it was like 20 to 30,000 or something like that. Then the remainder, they wanted to figure out, okay, do we put more towards the house so that we can buy higher in purchase price? Could we buy at the 600 to 650, or should we stick around the 500 to 550? So in their situation, I asked them, hey, at 500, 550, what type of houses are you seeing? Are you seeing like the 2-bed, 1-bath, or 2-bed, 2-baths, and 3-bed, 1-baths? They're kind of like weird, maybe on double yellows, right? Because it's harder to resale. And then at 600 to 650, are you seeing like the typical 3-bed, 2-bath, 4-bed, 2-baths? In their specific state, there's basements are common there. Sorry for the Californians, right? Basements aren't common in California where I'm at. But they basically said, yes, there's a massive difference between these price points when I went from 500-ish to 600-ish. I was like, okay, that's great to know. Do you plan on holding this property for as long as possible for the foreseeable future? Call it like 5, 10, 15 years. They said yes. Okay. So then I was like, this one will probably appreciate more than this one because I've made some terrible mistakes where I would buy houses where they were cheaper in either not so nice areas or just like weird layouts or on double yellows. That one's just on a main road. I'm like, dang it. That's for another video. But I wanted to teach these guys the lesson of like, if you can afford it, first and foremost, which based on the math that we did, they could afford it. It was within these range. So this one was obviously on the lower end. And this one was kind of on the, I think it was like 4,200. So it's just below their comfortable payment, but obviously above their bottom comfortable payment, right? So in that situation, I think this one makes the most sense because let's look at a weird house and then a typical house. Like what happens over time is usually this, okay? Appreciation, so 0, 5, 10. So here's the average appreciation, right? Let's just say that, okay? Then I'm gonna do this in blue because we're cool and we wanna change up the colors. Okay, then we have the typical house is probably gonna follow, guess what? Your typical average appreciation. So it's probably gonna go something like this, you know, not always the same. Okay, so I just grabbed a red one here. So let's just say this is the weird one. I know, sorry for the adjectives. It's the weekend right now, we gotta have fun. Okay, and then the weird one is a lower appreciation curve, right? Because again, this is the average. So you're gonna have some that appreciate better. Maybe you're in an up and coming neighborhood and it's the typical house. But then there's the weird one, which is kind of like brings down the average. There's ones that bring up the average, right? So if you buy a typical house in your neighborhood, typically it's gonna stay with the average appreciation for that zip code, okay? If you buy something weird, you know, 2-bed, 1-bath, single family house, or a 1-bed, 1-bath, single family house, which is kind of rare, I should say. It's right next to a liquor store, something like crazy like that, right? You're gonna have lower appreciation because obviously it's less desirable and it's a specific buyer that wouldn't mind living there, right? So that's where I was like, okay, so this is the typical house, that's good to know. And are you comfortable with this? Yes. So then what we wanted to do was, because they had a pretty sizable down payment, we wanted to allocate some to the house purchase. So they were originally gonna do 3% down, but then we ended up changing, let's do 5% down because you get better, guess what? PMI, okay? We were actually gonna figure out, should we do 10% down? Because you get even better PMI. So lower, 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 and this one's like PMI, okay? So originally they were gonna do 3% down, but because of their timelines, goals, etc., the 5% down made sense. It made the payment below 4,500, so it was like 42 and change, I believe, something like that. And on top of it, we were able to allocate 6 months of reserve. And here's the other kicker. Because of their sizable down payment, we also could use this, and I think it was like 30 grand. Don't quote me on this, but it was like another 30 grand that we could put in the other assets, and they ended up doing S&P 500. Now, I didn't instruct them on that because I'm not a financial advisor, but I said, hey, you got $30,000, do something smart with it. You can put in a high yield savings or something like that. They ended up doing the S&P 500. So in that situation, instead of putting it all into the house, kind of like the original question that I had, question number 1, was we wanted to be more flexible because there's so many unknowns already, like with the house, etc., that if we found it more wise to keep more money in their pocket and then do the 5% down instead of jumping all the way here, because there wasn't a major difference in putting way more down, and they were able to get the house that they liked or search for the houses that they like. So in summary, if you have a scenario where you're trying to figure out, hey, I'm trying to go from one price point to another price point, and it does not change the locations or the type of quality of house, then don't do it, right? You don't need to spend more money to spend more money. But if there's a massive difference between one price point and the other, and you open up like a whole nother realm and grade, like A, B, C, D, E, and F, quality house, and you can get to more of a typical house in the neighborhood, I think that makes sense. But of course, please be in your comfortable payment range. Don't go house poor or anything like that. So hope that helps you as well. Question number 3, if I wanted to put my girlfriend's name on the house with me, where do I do that? Or do we have to wait for when we are married? Okay, so this is a good question too. So we'll just say married partner, not married partner, okay? So that's a great question because it actually depends on the state you're in. So you wanna figure out, if I'm in California, it's a community property state, okay? So that's gonna be important because there's 2 different types of loans, buckets, I should say, right? There's gonna be government loans, which is FHA, VA, and USDA. Then there's gonna be like your conventional, jumbo, etc. When it comes to government loans, if you're married, you have a few options, okay? If you wanna add them to title, you could totally do that. But it also depends if it's like VA too, because VA is kind of a little sticky situation. We'll actually save that for last. So if you're married and you don't wanna have them on the mortgage, so this is the key word, you wanna remove them from the mortgage for government loans and you're married in a community property state, so that's like California, and you can Google like community property states, then you technically need to either have them on the mortgage or you have to add their debts to your mortgage, but then you can remove their income. The reason why that might be beneficial is like if you have a really high credit score and then your partner has a low credit score and you want to take advantage of the higher credit score, that's where you would want to do what's called a non-borrowing spouse, right? You add their debts because it's a community property state. You basically say, death do us part, right? So debts are yours, and vice versa. But you can't use their income, which is kind of like messed up, but it is what it is because you're not using their credit score specifically. So you still gotta add the debts. So that might affect your qualifications. So you wanna make sure you figure that out. So that's, again, if you're married, have a married partner. If you're unmarried, technically you don't need to add them to the mortgage at all, even if it's a community property state. So that's something you also wanna figure out too, is like, hey, I plan on getting married soon, but I know my credit score is super high and theirs is super low. That's where you actually want to be really strategic on when you actually buy a house, because that could actually affect your qualifications if you need to do a government loan. When it comes to VA, so VA is a very weird one because if you have somebody that's like not married to you, so let's say you can still get a VA loan, by the way. You can get a VA loan with your friend, you can get a VA loan with another active duty service member, whatever, right? Or veteran, non-veteran, I should say, like parents, they would actually, like if you're the active duty service member or you have VA eligibility, the other person would have to bring in a 12.5% down payment. Basically, VA guarantees your part of the loan, which is 25% of the loan, blah, 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 insures it, fancy words for, you put 0% down, they have to put 12.5% down, okay? So let's say we're buying a $100,000 house, you bring in 0, your non-married partner would have to bring in $12,500 in this simple example. And then you just scale it up based on your purchase price. So VA is kind of weird. So that's where you want to be a little mindful of, right? And then you have situations like, okay, let me just add them on title afterwards. That's where you want to make sure with your lender, say, hey, it's okay if I add them on later, blah, blah, blah. Usually it's okay. VA is kind of a little sticky one. So you want to make sure you talk to your mortgage advisor about that, okay? So that's like the government side. On the conventional side, you could kind of do whatever you want. I don't want to like have anyone take that out of context here. But on conventional, even if you're a community property state or not, you can just be on the mortgage and you can add married partner, non-married partner to title if you wanted to, right? Like if you're using all your income, credit, etc., you can still do that for conventional. So conventional is a little more flexible. Government has way more strict rules, basically just to keep it simple. So if you're in that situation, definitely reach out to your mortgage advisor because there's so many different avenues depending on the state, loan, etc. But hopefully that gives you a rough idea. Like I said, conventional, more flexible on what you do. You can add partner, not partner, blah, blah, blah. Government, way more strict. So definitely talk to a mortgage advisor on that side. Okay, hope that helps. Question number 4, my plan is to look at these condos tomorrow, and if I really like one of them, I'll get the ball rolling. Is that a bad game plan? It's funny because I made an Instagram reel probably like 3 weeks ago, and then, obviously it takes time to film, edit, blah, blah, blah. And this client asked me this question literally the day I posted it, which is kind of weird. So I sent it to him, and that's why I wanted to talk about this on today's mortgage support call, which is basically talking about when should we start the process, not to buy a house, just to be clear, but when to start the process and I would say prepare. So let's go over that. Okay, so first thing is I want us to understand the difference between perfect timing, so let's call it perfect timing, versus perfect preparation. So what's the difference between these two? So perfect timing is, I would say, is a myth in home buying. I don't think I've ever seen someone perfectly time every single detail. So perfect timing is like, hey, I'm gonna find the perfect house at the perfect time my lease ends with the perfect sellers that are reasonable and gonna give me the best price in the world. And they're gonna give me all their closing costs. So they pay for all my closing costs. And yeah, my perfect timeline, I get to move in so I'm not paying rent and double mortgage. And also like, they also have great timing where they're not having to buy another house, blah, blah, blah. And then it's the perfect house at the perfect price point with the perfect rate, etc. You see, you have to hit all of these factors and variables. That's a lot of pressure, especially if it's your first house. I'm just being honest with you. Like if it's your first house, you're going to run into analysis paralysis. And when you're in analysis paralysis, that means no decision is going to be made. And then you basically just wait a ton of time, etc. So please understand, perfect timing is really weird. And I believe it's a myth because rarely ever happens, if ever happens. So what I'd rather focus on is what are the controllable actions that I can do that are in my control. You have no control over what the seller does, right? They might be going through a nasty divorce or something like that. You have no control over that. Maybe someone in their family passed away and they had to pull that off the market or something like that, right? What I'd rather do is let's focus on perfect preparation where you actually have all the control over perfectly preparing, okay? And I'll give you another analogy. Perfect timing is like, okay, so here's you, and then here's, especially anyone out there who has their soulmate, partner, yeah. Say partner. Oh gosh. I hope you guys are liking these drawings. These are the real deal. No AI here. Okay, so your perfect partner, right? So it's almost like perfect timing. It's okay, so November 7th at 11:17 a.m. I'm gonna go Central Coast time because even though I live in Pacific time, maybe I'm like gonna be traveling and I want it at this exact different time zone, okay? Additionally, I'm gonna be at the Tango conference, okay? And that's where I'm gonna find my perfect partner. And additionally, on top of that, I'm gonna meet them, like I said, I'm gonna pick the city, let's call it Los Angeles, California, okay? So that's where it's gonna all happen. Perfect timing. That's really weird, in my opinion. Like, just think about that, like when you zoom out as you're listening to this, you're like, no, that's actually really weird. Like, how did you meet your partner? Anyone watching this, did it happen just like this, or did it just so happen that you stumbled upon them randomly, like where you weren't planning on going to something, but you ended up meeting them, or you might have wanted to cancel the date, but then you ended up going and then you had a great time, or you gave them a second chance and ended up being amazing, right? So what I'm trying to say is when you perfectly prepare, that's like the actions you can control, which is like finding out what your budget is, right? Using my home ownership free trial for free. All you got to do is go down below and download the guide. It's literally free. Figure out what your budget is. What's your location that you want to purchase at, right? And guess what? You don't know this until you actually get more research or what neighborhoods you want to live in until you start driving the neighborhoods, right? Like you're not going to have this happen and find the house on the same day, turn your search on, find the perfect house, turn the search off, and then be like, okay, this is perfect. You got to do some preparation ahead of time, right? You got to find your team. And honestly, like if you find your team, there's a very popular saying in the entrepreneur space, you build the people and the people build the business, right? Like if you find the right team member and team members, real estate agent and mortgage advisor, they should make your life easier and make these items way easier too. And then also like usually budget, home ownership free trial, and then you can go a step further and get like a soft pre-approval, which doesn't hurt your score at all. There's no risk. It's like literally a free trial to get more information from experts that have gone through the process before, okay? So that's perfect preparation, right? And the analogy I like to give is like, it's just like you, right? Maybe you didn't happen to do this perfectly at the perfect time, but maybe ahead of time, you were like, okay, maybe I should learn how to actively listen. Maybe I should know how to communicate. Maybe I should learn how to ask great questions. Maybe I should, get a haircut, get a hairdo, whatever you want to call it, do my nails, etc., right? Make myself more presentable. When you do the controllables, right, which you can control all that, the perfect timing actually happens as a consequence, right? Maybe this does happen, but because you perfectly prepared and maybe you were looking months before, weeks before, years before, but you gathered all these skills ahead of time. And then when you find your partner on this date at the Tango conference in LA, randomly speaking, right, you were already perfectly prepared. So I always like to give this analogy is don't fall into the when then fallacy, which is when I get fit, then I'm gonna go to the gym. When I get healthy, then I'm gonna go to the hospital. The order's wrong, right? You go to the gym to get fit. You go to the hospital to get healthy. You perfectly prepare to perfectly time the house, right? You don't perfectly time the house, then find the house, if that makes sense. Yeah, all I'm saying is please, please, please don't fall into when then fallacy, because I think it makes home buying a lot more stressful when you can make it way less stressful by perfectly preparing. And it does take the 4-letter word, which is WORK, which is work. But like I said, if you have the right team, they will make your life easier. Like that's a guarantee, like without a doubt. And take the 500 plus families that we've helped as data points on that. And you don't even need to work with me, right? Like you can work with somebody else in a different city, location, whatever, right? Like I might not even be licensed there, but like I can promise you when you find the right team, they will make your life easier. And when you perfectly prepare, your home buying process will be a lot smoother, okay? So like I said, don't fall into when then fallacy, get the order right, and then your life will be a lot easier when you're actually going through the process. So that's it. Those are the 4 questions that I've had today. I hope that helps you during your home buying journey. Make sure to subscribe so that way you can get the next mortgage support call and your question might actually be on it. And if you haven't yet, grab the homeownership free trial guide down below. Again, it's free. It will help you figure out what your comfortable budget is. So that way you don't fall into the when then fallacy, like I said. And if you haven't yet, make sure to check out my other video right over here. YouTube's recommending it. I think you'll like it, and I'll catch you on the next one.